Alright, so the video that you guys have been waiting for is finally here. And that animation that you see right here behind me is what we're gonna be building in this video. Because this was gonna be basically a challenge type of video, 1 minute, 5 minutes, and then 1 hour, something like that. I divided these in 3 steps so that you can basically understand of what the complexity of each one of those is. And believe me, when I say that, it's actually easier and simpler than you think. Now, when you do things like these, it's basically a lot of experimentation and trying things out until you end up with something that you like. And that is basically how I ended up with that animation. So make sure to watch this whole video so that you can learn a bunch of interesting things that will take your knowledge to the next level, hopefully. I've divided these into 3 steps that might look a little bit more complex than the previous one, but to be honest, it's not that more complex. So let's start by the step 1. All right, so on the step 1, this is what the node tree looks like. And to be honest, there's a couple of elements right here that are not exactly needed, like these merge node right here. So to build this right away, what you will need is, first of all, a background node. Let me build this here on the side. On this background node, you're gonna add an ellipse, and then you can make these a little bit smaller. Now, on this background node, we're gonna press Ctrl C and Ctrl V, and then just paste that to be the second one. Now, I want the polygon to go into this one. So I'm gonna press Ctrl T, so that's our background. Now, I'm gonna select this background and draw a polygon. Press Ctrl G if you wanna see a mask on your viewer, not a mask, but the guidelines right here. And I'm gonna click right here in the center and then all the way up here. If it's not completely aligned, it's not that big of a deal, but you can press Ctrl and your arrow keys to move these a little bit like that. All right, now we're gonna increase the border width of these. And then we're gonna have to animate the curvature of these. First of all, let me get rid of the polyline right here because we're gonna use this in a little bit. Okay. Now, if you can see here, there's this transform node, which is what's gonna add the swinging motion right here. So I'm gonna add that transform node, and I'm gonna press 2. And here in this transform node, I'm gonna set the pivot point to be all the way to 1. So it goes a little bit all the way up here. And I'm gonna move these a little bit higher. Now, when I move these like that, you have to take into account that we don't want these to disappear from our screen, right? So that's why I move these a little bit higher like that. All right, now that you have that ready, you are good to animate the angle of these. So let's start by doing that. So we're gonna be at frame 0, and then at frame 24, we're gonna go to that side, to the other side. And at frame 0, I'm gonna bring these to the negative amount. So that will be minus or negative 20.5. Now we have that movement. Now we're gonna go to the spline tool, select the transform node, and we're gonna press, selecting all of them by pressing Ctrl A, we can set these to ping pong. That will make these continue to move like that. Now, if you take a look at this polygon, we can see that it has a little bit of a curvature animation. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go to the frame 0, and I'm gonna create a keyframe for these. And I'm gonna select these, both of them, and I'm gonna hold Ctrl and move these curved line right here. Whoops. Selecting these, holding Ctrl like that. And then also on this side, select first, then hold Ctrl. Now we're gonna go to frame 24 and we're gonna move these to the opposite way. Like that. Selecting this point right here, click, and then move like that. Now let's take a look at how that looks. Now we're gonna go to the spline tool also, and I'm gonna make sure that I loop these or I ping pong these as well. And there we have our animation. Then what you can do is select both of these and press, with both of them selected, press F, now press T, and you can adjust the ease in and out values. Now, if you take a look at these, we have these duplicates right here. And that duplicate is for this one right here. And I'm gonna have to move this transform node a little bit higher so that it doesn't hit each other, right? So we're gonna move these a little bit higher again, and at the half point mark, so like at around 13 or 12. I'm gonna move these higher like that. So let's take a look at that. Okay, now we can add a drop shadow. And I'm gonna move these like here a little bit to the side. Now, as you can see, we have this duplicate right here that has a different drop shadow in a rectangle. Now, to be honest, this is just what I came up when I was testing really quickly, but you don't really need to have two of them. So if you're building a simple one, you can add the duplicate right here and then make sure that you switch these to be 180 degrees on the size, on the angle. And now we have it there. Now you just have to make sure that they are not hitting each other in the center like that. Now let's add a background node here. And then we're gonna bring that there. Press T so that this background is the actual background. Now on this example right here, we have this other background because I had a different idea first, right? So I was gonna animate this merge node blending so that it went from black to white, right? But that's not really needed. What you can do is just have this actual background be the color that you want it to be. In this case, we're just gonna make these white. And then the thing that I used to animate was the invert color node, right? So what you want to do for that is press 2, first of all here, and then we're gonna add an invert color node. Press 2, and then the whole thing is already inverted. Now with these inverted, you can adjust the drop shadow a little bit more if you want, so that's not that big or that strong. It's really up to you, right? So get to a point where you like it best. Now to invert these, what I did was that I wanted to happen right at the center. Let me just work with one screen. So in this case, it's not completely aligned. Like in this case, if we go to the frame 12 or 13, they actually get to that point right in there. But in this case, they're not really getting to that point. So if you want to really make sure that they're in the center or both of them, what you can do is adjust the spline tool, right? So we're going to select both of these, the polygon and the transform. And then making sure we go to the frame, let's say 12, we can adjust the ease in and out of both, holding Control like that. You can adjust the ease out also. And that's how we get to that frame 12 being exactly at the center on both of them. All right, now we can go back and then go to settings here on the invert color. And here we're gonna go to frame, let's say right here, 12. And we're gonna start the white color background, right? Then we're gonna go to frame 13 and we're gonna set these to be 1. Now the inversion is gonna happen right there. Now at frame 24, or actually it's gonna be at 36. We're gonna animate here again at 1, and then at 37 it's gonna be 0. Now let's take a look. Now we can go to the spline tool and we're gonna try to make these repeat itself. Now the thing is that if we want to set a loop for this, we need one extra one. So we're gonna have to go to the 6th frame, and here we're gonna have to create this keyframe right here at 0. And now if we, let me check, we're gonna set loop. Now we can actually continuously make that happen without us having to worry about it. All right, and that is basically how you can have that first step animation. That's pretty much it. Pretty straightforward. Now, before we jump into the next step, let me quickly tell you about the PaperFoldFX, which is the plugin or toolkit to create PaperFoldFX or collages inside DaVinci Resolve that I built. So if that is something that you want to use in your videos, make sure to check out PaperFoldFX.com and see everything that it has to offer right there. Now let's jump into the step 2. And if we go into Fusion right here, let me get rid of the spline menu right here. This looks pretty crazy because I had these double drop shadows right here as well that we don't exactly need. If I just go and add this duplicate right here to make it simple and then deactivate these, you can see that the same, nothing really changed, right? All right, now this exact same thing happens right here with this background node that I added again. We don't need to have these because this background is black. It doesn't do anything. If we press 2 on this merge node, it's just overlaying or like having this background as that on top of it. And there's no difference in the apply mode either. So this background animation that we have here, or this gradient, can or might as well just be happening on this same background right here. So let me just copy and paste what we just built on the first step. I'm gonna go to step 2, and then right here we're just gonna paste this. So this is what we have so far. If we want to animate or not have to do this whole thing, what you want to do is first we're gonna go to the ellipse background right here, press 2, and here we're gonna change the type of the color to gradient. Here you will just choose 2 colors that you want to use. In this case, let me just choose red, just because. And then what can be in this side? Something a little bit more contrasty. This one, right, I like that. And then what I did, I actually brought these closer so that it only fits around the area of our circle right here. Now I wanted to animate the gradient itself to have that movement like that you see on the step 2 preview, but it was not possible to do that animating it. So what I ended up having to do was using a transform node. So this is what happens with the transform node. Now we're working on this background basically, but the cool thing is that this ellipse is not really moving at all because the whole animation is happening on this transform node, so we don't have to worry about adding another background right here. If you were animating this ellipse as having a movement with like the position, like here for example, like that, then by adding another transformer right here, that would have been affected. So that's a cool thing of working with different nodes, that you can basically deactivate and the main element is basically still and untouched. All right, so we're gonna animate from 0, and I'm gonna have to take a look at these transform nodes to see where it's at. Yeah, and then to 100 or negative 100 degrees. And then here we're gonna animate these to negative 100. Now let's take a look at these. And it looks pretty good. Now also make sure to go to this spline tool right here and press fit to screen, and then here you can adjust the ease in and out. And ideally you would want to adjust all of these at the same time later on. So we're first gonna add the gradient to the polygon and then adjust these. But I also have to make sure that I set up these to be a ping pong animation. All right. Now we're gonna animate, or basically we can actually just copy and paste this background right here by going to paste settings, and now we have that same gradient on our polygon. If we take a look at these, we have the gradient on the polygon, and the polygon itself is what's animating the gradient right here. There's no like a transform animation on these, but let's take a look to see how it looks if we just left it like these. All right, so this polygon is actually moving, right? So we're gonna have to adjust the gradient a little bit more, because if we just bring it like these the whole time when it's on this side, I think it's gonna have that bluish color. Remove these, yeah. So we're gonna have to adjust these like that a little bit. And that's what makes it change color a little bit. Now we could go a long more time and try to make these perfect, but that is pretty much it on this case right here. So we have everything else already. If we just take a look at these, then we have that inversion happening right there. On the step 2, that was basically it. There was nothing big, nothing else added to it because it was like a 5-minute experiment. So I couldn't do a lot more, right? Now, when I had 1 hour is when I had more time to try things out, right? And it is where I added a bunch of more elements. Now, another quick interruption before we jump into the last step. Another toolkit that I built is the split screens toolkit. If you are wanting to use split screens on your videos, make sure to check out the split screens toolkit on the SUALVI website. Maybe it's something that will help you out in your projects. So let's go into step 3 and let's take a look at these. Now this one still has the remains of that double drop shadow that we had here, right? So we're gonna paste what we just built the number 2. Now these step 3 has a couple of elements that we have added. First of all, it has these switching from the ellipse to rectangles right at the middle point mark, right? So it has that same animation with a dissolve node. Then we have also added a film grain, which is gonna have a mask. And the reason for that is that if we get rid of that mask, the film grain is applied to everything, and we might not want to have these applied to everything. That's why I added a film grain to that. And then the last thing that we added was this duplicate that has a bunch of things right here, like the time offset. And then the key thing here is the processing of the colors that has deactivated the red channel. And that's what makes it look a little bit more interesting. Now, this duplicate part is what's gonna make these take a lot more time to render. So that's what we're gonna add right at the end of everything. So first of all, we're gonna go back to our main composition that we had just built. And we're gonna add that dissolved section right here. We're gonna add a rectangle, and I don't wanna have to resize these again. So I'm gonna just copy and paste this rectangle that we just had here. But it's basically just a normal rectangle. Now we're gonna press Ctrl spacebar and add a dissolve node. And I'm gonna connect these ellipses right here as a background. And I'm gonna connect the rectangle as the foreground. Now I'm gonna add these again as a background mask to these backgrounds. Now if we press 2 on these, dissolve, it's always in the background, or it's still in the background, right? What we want it to happen is to transform like that. So we're gonna have to do these again at the half point mark, similar to what we used for the invert animation, on the same keyframes that we had for the invert animations. So I'm gonna use a keyframe here on the background. Then at frame 13, I'm gonna switch these to foreground. Now at frame, was it 36 again? Yeah, at frame 36, I'm gonna switch these from foreground to background again. And then lastly, we're gonna go at frame 60 and add another keyframe just like that. That way we can also just go to the spline tool and then loop these like that. So that continues to happen. Perfect. All right, now let's take a look at how this looks. Now we can actually adjust what I mentioned earlier, which was having all of the splines adjusted at the same time, because we're not really adding anything else that has a lot of movement into it. So we're gonna select the transform node, then the polygon, these the dissolve node and the invert node don't really need to have an ease in and out because it's just one frame to the next, so there's no need to adjust those. But we're gonna adjust the transform node, then also this one right here that has the gradient animation basically like that, and then also the polygon. Those are the elements that we wanna have that spline be exactly the same. So selecting everything in the spline section, press F, now press T, and we're gonna go to frame 12 and then make sure that our element is getting or hitting the middle right at that point mark. Otherwise, if we leave these like that, the inverted or inversion will happen at a offset time basically, or out of sync. Oh, and one last thing that I forgot to mention earlier was that later on we added these, the last thing I added was these zoom in type of effect here, that just to add a little bit more interesting factor into it. After we have that, we can now add the film grain. Let's add the film grain to see how that looks. I'm gonna press Ctrl spacebar and add a film grain. Now this adds grain to everything. So if we go to the white section, you can see that everything has grain right here. And the texture and stuff, you can play around. There's no exact values that you have to use, right? I'm just gonna leave it like that. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select this duplicate that we have right here, and I'm gonna connect these as a film grain to have a mask. That way the grain is only applied to our shape elements right here. And also we didn't do these on the drop shadow because otherwise the drop shadow area will have the film grain as well. Now I mentioned that we'll add the duplicate or the last duplicate as the last thing, right? So we're gonna first add the transform node that I mentioned here, which was this effect of like, let's go to the edit page and let's take a look at that zoom in effect that we have right here. Whoop. Now this one took a little bit of time to experiment because I had to like play around with the spline curves right here, as you see. So we're gonna try to replicate that. I'm gonna press Ctrl Spacebar and add a transform node, press 2, and let's take a look at when we did these. So it was at frame 22, so right before it went back to like the loop section, I guess. Oh, I get it. The size started a little bit earlier, then we had the angle, and then at the end at frame 46 was when it went back to normal, basically. So let's try to do that as well. Let's see how we end up doing. We're gonna create 2 keyframes. Then let's see, at frame, what was it? At frame 36, we're gonna have that second, that zoomed in section. So we're gonna go to 36, and then I'm gonna zoom in like that. And then at frame 46, we're gonna bring these back to normal, and this is gonna be 180 degrees. So let's take a look at these. Now on this one, as you can see, we have these section right here, and we don't want that to happen. To avoid these, you can either have another background node that's after these, like that. So if you connect these like that, then nothing will happen. But the inverted, you'll have to create another inverted one over here. But that's just too complicated. So what you can do is go to edges and then duplicate the effect right here. And then we have it there. Now this doesn't look quite well yet. So we're gonna have to go to the spline tool. We're gonna have to play around with a bunch of different values right here. First of all, ease in and out, and maybe even holding Control so that you can adjust things manually like that. And let's make these a little bit bigger like that so we can see it better. Like that. Let's try to increase the ease in and out like that. Try to make them happen at the same points. Let's see how this looks. Now, the 36 one doesn't seem to have that much zoomed into. Yeah, it does have. I think it looks good like that. Yeah, that's basically what I did then. I held Control so that I could move one of the sides at the same time, like individually, right? All right, we have that. I think that looks good, and we don't have to do it twice, right? It's not needed to have that to happen that many times, so we don't have to loop these. Now, the last thing that we're gonna add is the duplicates that we have right here. So we're gonna add this duplicate before the other duplicate that we have here. Now in this duplicate, we're gonna process or not process the red channel. Nothing happens right now yet because we don't have the time offset on this duplicate. If we offset the timing these to -0.5 and then move this a little bit, we'll see that we have those echoes, I guess, that you can call these, or the replicas. Now on this duplicate, there's this keyframe animation for the time offset. The reason for that is that if you start these at -0.5, then at the end it eats that up basically. It's something weird that happens. So that's why I added here at frame 0, starting the time offset at 0, and then at frame 2 I set it up to the target offset time amount. So we're just gonna do that. So on this duplicate, we're gonna go and create a keyframe right here at 0. And we're gonna go 2 frames and set these to -0.5. And then at the end, when it's 2 frames left, we're gonna do that same thing. Like that. And don't worry if you don't see the last keyframe. What you can do here is press the keyframe to go 1 frame forward, or simply just add this number right here by moving your arrow keys up and down, and you can go ahead of like the limit that you have right here. Okay, and then it goes back to normal. Now I also had 3 copies. Now we have that. And that looks pretty good. But there's one thing missing, which is the motion blur. So on this duplicate, go to the settings section and add a motion blur. Now here is what it's really gonna make it look more interesting, but it's also making the amount of memory that it takes for the effect to work, right? It's a lot heavier on your system when you add motion blur, especially if you increase the quality. Now let's see what was the quality they used here? 6 right here. So we're gonna set this up to be 6. And then we can set this up to be the shutter angle also, like, this is all about just testing things out and trying things out until you get to the desired result. And as you can see, this whole thing already is a little bit heavy on the system. Right now, I have 96 gigabytes of RAM. So now it's using 54 supposedly. Even though I'm on Studio and I thought it would have to use a lot more from the GPU, it's using a lot of RAM right here. But yeah, now you can actually go to the Fusion section right here and then render all savers. And after this whole thing is rendered out, that should probably be it for this video, because you are pretty much done. So that is it for this video. After watching this whole thing, you probably think now that it's a lot easier than it looked, right? And it's probably true. So try to build one yourself, and not exactly like that maybe, but like just experiment with other type of movements. And if you do and upload them, share them in the comments of this video so we can all check them out and see what you have come up with. That is it for this video. Make sure to like it and also subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one. Here is SUALVI. Bye.